Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 136 of my modded Factorio playthrough. In this episode, we are going to upgrade our power generation by building some burner heat sources. Enjoy. It's a fairly compact machine. That's a 3x3. Generates 5.4 megawatts. That's the same output as boiler 3. I guess we can make one real quick here for a comparison. But the main difference is it's generating heat, not steam. It is more pollution efficient though, where you get 22.5 per second with boiler 3, but only 15 with the heat source, so it is better in that sense. But the thing that makes the heat sources really good is because they have neighbor bonuses, just like nuclear reactors. We can take 2 of them, and you have to completely line the pipes up like this for it to count, and there's no neighbor bonus right now because they're off, so you have to put some fuel in there to get it started. But you put it in there and instantly destroyed all of that wood. I don't know if you noticed, but for a split second that it was burning, it showed that the neighbor bonus was 50%. And if you hover over the icon here, it does say neighbor bonus as 50%. So basically, for every unit that they're next to, they get an extra 50% bonus to their heat output. So the best you can hope for is having a burner directly in the middle. So it would have a bonus of 4. Now, it is possible to do this with Bob's inserters. And I haven't really done any diagonal inserters, I don't think, but you totally could. Where you can do something like this. And let's put a box right there. Let's rotate it the correct direction. I don't want to get rid of all this fuel here, but you can put it in there, and it works diagonally just fine. So you can power heat sources like this if you can find a way to make the inserters work. That's the difficult part. Now, from a low effort maximum value setup for these heat sources, the best thing you can do just to have a 2-width line, because then you could just have fuel going in the normal way, no crazy inserter business, and the majority of the heat sources will have a 3 neighbor bonus because they'll be next to 3. The only ones that won't will be the ones on the very end, which are 2. So with something this short, 4 of them have the neighbor bonus of 2 and 4 of them have the neighbor bonus of 3. So definitely the longer the line gets, the more efficient it'll get. But ultimately, the average bonus will be about 3 because the only ones that won't have the bonus are the ones on the end. So we can do a quick calculation to guess what kind of bonus we would get for a certain line. So let's say we had 20 of these in a line. What kind of bonus would that be? Well, of the 20, the 4 on the outside will have a neighbor bonus of 2, and the ones in the middle will have a neighbor bonus of 3. And since this gets 50%, that'll be a 150% bonus. So the 16 in the middle will get a 150% bonus, and then the 4 on the outside will get 100 each. So we can add 400 there. So that's 2,800. And we can divide by 20 to get an average. And the average bonus will be 140, or 140%. So with a line of 20, we almost get the maximum of the theoretical maximum of 150 if it was infinitely long. So it's a pretty easy way, assuming you have a decent amount of them, to get a good bonus. But there are better ways. It just depends on how much space you have. Because you can do a little square here. And on itself, you're like, well, that's not very good. Well, if you imagine this square copied on itself multiple times, something like this. So the ones in the middle will have the neighbor bonus of 4. Most of the rest of them will be 3. And then some of these ones on the ends will be 2. So it's like the perimeter is 2, the very center is 4, and the rest of them are 3. But the problem is this setup needs to be very large to get the maximum value. Because when it's very small, its perimeter is very high compared to its area, so you don't get much of a value. You need to make it much bigger than this for it to become more efficient. And you can get above 150% efficiency with this, but it needs to be a big setup. So if you're not doing a big, giant setup, you probably don't want to bother with something like that, especially because, you know, how do you get the fuel in? Well, if you had bots and you could power this, just this alone, you know, these are 8 buildings, which would require 8 inserters. So it could be done, but really, logistically, you can't really do that, so you'd probably have to do something like this. And then you can have a belt going through the setup like this, and then you'd have inserters going into everything. And there'd just barely be enough space for all of the inserters and the power poles. You would be able to fit, I tested it, but the question is, do you want a setup that big? Because it needs to be huge, and I calculated that for it to be better than just doing a straight line, like a 2-width line, like this, you're probably looking on the order of like 150 burners or 200 burners, something like that. And I calculated a specific setup, like I just showed here, where it was like this, and I made it into a huge cube of 200 of these. And I think I calculated the average efficiency was 155%. So, you know, 10 or 15% better. So it is better if the setup is going to be huge. But if it's not, you probably don't need to suffer the headache of setting it up that way. So we could go straight into upgrading our primary power generation here. But instead of that, how about we go through all of the byproducts first? And how's the water doing? Hey, it went down. Fantastic. Let's take care of the byproduct burners first. And we actually don't have that many. I believe there's one of them here burning hydrogen. And then there's this mass of propane burners. And then technically we have this as a byproduct, these blocks here, but let's just count this whole thing as a setup. So first, let's start with hydrogen. Well, this is interesting to where we don't necessarily have a power target because we're burning byproducts. So instead of worrying about how much power we want to make, instead let's just concentrate on how much fuel will be available to burn. We can do that just by looking at how many electrolyzers we have, and we have 64 electrolyzers. So we can come in here and make a setup, but we will select energy, and let's do burner heat source, but the fluid burning heat source. And we'll say the energy is hydrogen, and we won't give it any neighbor bonuses for now. We will calculate that manually, because unfortunately, when you have organic setups like this, you can't perfectly calculate it with Hellmod, using Hellmod's neighbor bonus, but we can perfectly calculate it. We just have to do it ourselves. So we do that, and that requires an input of hydrogen. But how much hydrogen are we going to have? Well, we can go into here, select our process, which is fast dirt water electrolysis. Compute by factory, we have 64 of them, creating X amount of hydrogen. Can move that above. We can link this based on the hydrogen. We will need 11.8 burners to get through all of that hydrogen. And that's irrelevant of the neighbor bonus. The neighbor bonus tells you how much the output is going to be affected. The input's always going to be the same. So we have approximately 12. So now we have that heat, and we need to turn that heat into steam. So we'll do the heat exchanger. And we will link it based on the input. And that tells us that we need 5.9 heat exchangers. Now, this is when we start to come in here and change the numbers, because this assumes no neighbor bonus at all. So if we had 11.8 machines, how about let's make it 14, just to cover all of the other hydrogen in the factory. So now we don't really care about the hydrogen limit here. Let's just set this to 14. And it's going to create X amount of heat. This updated to 7. And it is a 2-to-1 ratio here, but that's almost completely irrelevant because there's always some kind of neighbor bonus with these. So don't worry about that ratio. So if we had 14 of them, 4 would be on the ends and 10 would be in the middle. So the 10 that are in the middle would have a bonus of 150 because they have a neighbor bonus of 3, which gives us our 1500. And then we can add the ones on the end, which have a neighbor bonus of 100%. So we add 400, which gives us 1900. And then 1900 divided by the number of boilers, so 14 gives us the average of 135.71. So we know that we're going to have 135.71% more heat than Hellmod thinks based on these calculations. So we come in here to heat exchanger and we say we want more production than this. So we need our 135.71, but that's an additional percent, not the total percent. So it's actually 235.71. And now we need 16.5 heat exchangers to provide this power. And here's the amount of steam. And it's interesting, though, that the ratio between heat exchangers and boilers is a little different. Because it started to where if you had a boiler, a regular boiler, it was 2 steam engines per boiler. And then if you had a fluid burning boiler, it was 3 steam engines per boiler. Well, if you have a heat exchanger, now it becomes 4 steam engines per boiler. So we could just calculate that out manually. But we can also show that this math works because we can come in here, select steam engine 3, link it by the input, and that's 66. So 16.5 times 4 is 66. So that ratio never changes. And this is going to produce 178.2 megawatts, which is quite a bit. I think we calculated this before and found that it was like 70 megawatts or 68 megawatts, something like that. So actually we could probably kind of calculate that as well, because we know our neighbor bonus is about 135. So if we had, let's say 68 is my guess, 68 megawatts times 2.35 gives us 159. So that's roughly, yeah, what that is there. So that kind of shows that basically it's all just the neighbor bonus that's dramatically improving the output of the fuel. So we can get a lot more out of our factory without doing anything nuts by just converting things. So is there anything else of note, kind of, that we need water for this? And it looks like it's 2 pumps worth, but it's actually not. That's 1 pump now because we researched the second tier of offshore pumps, which is right here, which requires white circuits, but it puts out 2,400 water per second. So that changes the ratio of boilers to pumps across the factory as well, and a slight increase in efficiency because it's less power for the pumps now. But we have a build to do. That should be most of what we need here. So let's try to build a setup first and see how much space it takes, and then we can go from there. Let's make the heat exchangers, which are the same as they are any other setup. They take up more space, so that might be problematic, squeezing it in there. So we might have to put it down here or something. But you see how the consumption of water is 120 per second and has an output of 120 per second. Which means we need 4 of these. Have some wire reach problems, so just going to have to do it somewhat inefficiently here. It looks like something like this. That can be tiled. So that's the power generation side. We can just hook up the heat pipes, and now we need our heat sources. Looks like I only made the non-fluid version. And luckily, the fuel interconnects here, so we don't have to do anything special. We can just put them in a line along here. To get our neighbor bonuses. We probably want to try to space that out and just put it right in the middle so it's nice and symmetrical. Somewhere like right there. And then the fuel could come in and it'll have its logic and whatnot, but it'll be something like this. Okay, we have a bit of a setup to upgrade here. And we could probably replace this latch with something that's a little more modern. But for now, we can just connect that and use up all of the fuel that's in there. But while it's doing that, does this have any hope of fitting here? Kind of, actually. If we put that belt in a slightly different spot and we just squeeze this up here, it would oh so barely fit. Something like this, although we have to space it out a little bit because we can't have those wires connecting. We have to connect them on our own. We need to put a little landfill in there. Although if we space it out just like this, it looks like it works. We need to put a latch in here, and I believe we made a unified version of it, which we can put right there. And actually, it's also set to hydrogen, which is convenient, but I think these numbers are based on the smaller tank size, so let's set this to 40k and 30k. So that tank is filling up. Probably want to fill up one on the other side as well, because we were having some flow rate issues. So we can put another tank on this side. And let's get a pump in there to fill it back up. Let's use one of our nicer offshore pumps. We can connect the water like that. And we do have to get the signal from this tank to the logic here. And we need to connect the other tank to it as well. So it adds the two tank capacities together, which we need to remember for our settings. Because if we have two tanks together, then the overfill condition is actually going to be 80. And this one is going to be 60. And we need to get that connected to the input. Looks like I used a red wire. This one, so we can use green to make it connect. Oh, it doesn't reach. Looks like the factory's basically caught up at this point, so we're trying to make changes to the power system, but looks like that test was over because it's now caught up, and we're gonna have to start making stuff again to find out. But we know we have a problem, and it's roughly 600 megawatts worth of a problem, so that's kind of what our goal is here. But we can connect these two tanks. And here's the heat sources, very slowly heating up. It's going to take them quite some time to do so, because the minimum temperature for these heat exchangers to work is 465 degrees. So until they get to that point, these aren't going to work. And you can see that hydrogen is almost gone. Actually, knowing that, I kind of want to shut these down for a second, because these will have no problem at all completely annihilating the hydrogen that's in the factory. So we need to put some pumps in here and basically say if the level gets too low, in this case, let's say 10,000 to turn off, or the inverse is that hydrogen has to be more than 10,000 to turn on at all. Stuff is still getting damaged. Oh, that's actually the western wall. I was not expecting that one to be taking damage. But it's holding, so we'll see how it goes. Alright, well, these are going to briefly run, as they are. And they have a huge amount of heat that they have to build up before they'll actually start producing power. But they will eventually. We might see a much faster reaction by working on that propane, but it might all be burned away too. The factory has a burst capacity to it, so after the burst is over, you don't see any action, because everything that happened already happened. But we have a known byproduct, so we can calculate based on that byproduct in basically the same way, where we have all of these steam crackers. We have 9 of them, so let's assume all 9 of them are making propane gas. So we can adjust our calculations based on that. Let's just say we have 1 for now, and the fuel that it's burning is propane. It's hard to figure out which one of that it is. There we go. So to make the propane, we crack it. However, we've got 9 of them, creating a certain amount of propane. So instead we can link this based on input. So we have our propane in, and that's going to require 34.8 of these furnaces, creating lots of megawatts, 187. We put that into the heat exchanger, and that gets our number, but we need to do our calculation for these heat sources. Let's build this a little bigger. We have 34 here. Let's just make it 40 because it's an easier number to calculate. So of that, 36 of them have the 150% bonus. Plus the ones on the end add the 400. So 5,800 divided by 40 burners gives us our average of 145%. So we come in here and we increase this to 245%. So we need 42.6 of them and 162 steam engines. It is going to take the factory a period of time to warm up before these will start producing heat, a disadvantage of using heat pipes. So we probably don't want to go too nuts with this. So we probably don't want to upgrade the main setup until the propane setup has been upgraded and fully heated up and producing energy. Now another thing we need to consider is that we're limited by water. So we might want to build these in such a way that it is the ratio of water to heat exchangers. We can actually calculate that out because a heat exchanger uses 120 water a second. So that's 20 of them per pump here. So it looks like we basically need 2 full sets and then like 3 more on the side, basically, to max it out. Okay, I think we've got enough resources, so let's go and build this. Somewhere around here, but it's going to be 20 long instead of 10. We need to do 2 of them. Let's see, what temperature are we at? 233. We're getting there. But how many is this? 17. Let's grab a few of these here. Basically whatever the repeating pattern is. So it's like here, and there's a light, and there, and then there's a light. So we need to put a whole bunch of these in here. It's part of the setup, almost half, so maybe we can copy it to the other side here. And if we move these pipes out of the way a little bit, it should fit in nicely. So now hopefully we can take this whole thing and flip it so it will just barely slice in here. Except we'll space it a little so they're not fighting with each other. Like right here. Okay, so we need 40 of these in a line. Looks like it fits just fine. So we can bring the heat pipe up in here. And probably straight across right there. Then we need that latch. Because propane is already there. The settings are correct. That should work. So now we just need to nuke our propane gas again. But let's see here, how to fill it. Well, this is set to turn on if propane gas is less than 5,000. Probably should upgrade that to 10 here. Because that turns on and this turns on as well. So we don't want to put all of it in there then, because if we go below 10,000, then a lot of that is going to run unnecessarily. So let's say 20,000. So you put that in there. Connect it. Say propane has to be more than 20,000. for it to fill up. Which might take a while. But that's probably pretty good. Because it's going to take a period of time for it to fire up. And this one is at 340. So it's getting there, but it's still not producing power. So I definitely don't want to replace this, because I want at least these to be running first. But in the meantime, you could probably place a few more accumulators, which will help out. It looks like our burners are getting close to the temperature which they'll start operating. We might get some more even heating performance if we put all of those next to these boilers here, rather than having them a small distance apart. It'll probably work out fine, but having it closer would be better. I didn't realize how evenly this stuff would have slotted next to each other. I totally would have done it this way if if it had occurred to me that that was like perfect. Oh well. We're gonna waste some heat here by moving these things around. So I got a bunch of accumulators built in here. They're charging up. Filled up this as much as I could without using a ton of landfill. So we'll have to see how that holds. Seems like the factory's doing pretty good so far. Of course, it's died down. Not much production's happening anymore. But we'll have to see. And the only way to find out is to build stuff. So let's work on this science setup. But that's going to have to wait until the next episode. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.